When Corrado Cardinale stepped out of his blacked-out Escalade onto the red carpet of the Marquette Grand Hotel, the photographers on Michigan Avenue did what they always did, held their breath and aimed their lenses at the door, expecting someone extraordinary. They got someone extraordinary. They just weren't expecting her. The woman who took Corrado's extended hand and stepped out onto the carpet was not a runway model. She was not the sleek, carefully managed socialite Chicago had been quietly predicting for 4 years. She was Verity Dunmore, 29 years old, size 16, with dark auburn curls that sprang in every direction she hadn't managed to pin them, wearing a sapphire blue gown that hugged every curve of her body like it had been designed specifically to announce her arrival. She wore round, wire-rimmed glasses and a small, defiant smile. Her other hand clutched a sleek black evening bag, just large enough to hold a flash drive and a tube of chapstick. The crowd of Chicago's most powerful people went entirely quiet. That quiet lasted approximately 3 seconds before the whispering began, and it would not stop for the rest of the night. The story didn't start there, though. It started 72 hours earlier, in the 23rd floor boardroom of the Cardinale Group, where everything smelled like imported espresso and other people's fear. Corrado was halfway through a conversation about Port Authority contracts, a conversation that was entirely legal and entirely beside the point, when the boardroom door opened without a knock and Verity Dunmore walked in. She did this sometimes, not often, but enough that his head of security had stopped trying to intercept her. She always had a folder. She always had a look on her face, like she was carrying something heavy, and had every intention of setting it down on whoever was standing between her and a solution. Today, the folder was thick. The look was worse than usual. Mr. Cardinale. She walked past the 2 men from the Planning Commission without sparing them a glance, crossed the room and dropped the folder in front of Corrado with a sound like a gavel strike. "We have a problem." He looked at the folder. He looked at Verity. He looked at the men from the Planning Commission. "Gentlemen," he said without inflection, "we'll reschedule." They left. Nobody in the Cardinale building needed tone explained to them. Verity opened the folder herself, flipped to a tabbed section near the back, and rotated it to face him. "Your Director of Operations, Dennis Stetz, has been running ghost employees through the Southside distribution payroll for 14 months, 43 names. None of them real. Their salaries are being routed into accounts that trace back to a shell company registered in Delaware." She pressed her finger to the page. That shell company filed a tax return last February, an incorrect one which flagged an algorithm at FinCEN. The flag generates an audit referral in 68 hours. Corrado turned a page, read 3 lines, turned another. "The ghost payroll totals $2.1 million. Verity continued. She had clearly been awake for a long time. There was ink on the inside of her wrist, a smudge near her collar she hadn't noticed, and the particular tightly wound energy she carried when she'd spent a night working through something that mattered. "I found it because I was running projected liability exposure on the distribution segment, and the variance ratio was statistically impossible. Nobody has 0% turnover in a 60-person warehouse for 14 straight months unless the 60 people don't exist." "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since 4 this morning." It was 10:47 a.m. She had spent nearly 7 hours building a case before she came to him. He turned another page. "Fix it," he said. Verity stared at him as though deciding whether that response was adequate. She decided it wasn't. "I already started. I need your authorization to reclassify the payroll disbursements retroactively as contracted labor under the infrastructure segment. I can construct the documentation trail. It'll hold through a standard audit." She slid a single authorization form across the mahogany. "But it costs you every dollar in the Delaware accounts. I've already drafted the dissolution paperwork." Corrado picked up his pen, heavy, steel, the kind that cost more than most people's car payments, and signed without reviewing the figures. He'd learned early that the figures were Verity's jurisdiction. He trusted her arithmetic the way he trusted his own hands. "You could have sent this through the secure portal," he said. "I could have," she recapped her highlighter. "I wanted to see your face when you found out it was Stet's." A pause. "You didn't look surprised." "I wasn't." She considered that for exactly 2 seconds, nodded once the way she did when she'd filed a new data point and moved on. "I'll have the reclassification submitted before close of business." Verity. She stopped. Corrado set down the pen. He'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks. He was done waiting. "My brother Emilio is engaged. Tonight is the announcement gala. I need someone to come with me." She turned around slowly. "You're telling me this because I want you there." The silence that followed had texture to it. Then Verity made a short, bewildered sound and looked at herself. The unruly curls, the reading glasses she'd forgotten to remove, the ink stain she still hadn't found. "You want me to go to a Cardinale family gala as your date?" "Yes." She waited for the qualifier. None came. She set her folder on the nearest chair and crossed her arms. "Mr. Cardinale, my entire function here is actuarial risk analysis. I don't own anything that belongs at that kind of event. I don't know your family, and I'll tell you plainly right now, if anyone in that room says something condescending to me, I will respond. I cannot promise the response will be what you'd call diplomatic." "I'm not asking you to be diplomatic." "Then what exactly are you asking me to be?" He looked at her steadily, present. She opened her mouth, closed it, picked up her folder and turned toward the door. "I appreciate the thought. The answer is no." "Your sister Britt," Corrado said. Verity stopped. The room went very quiet. "She borrowed $65,000 from a man named Ruiz, who runs collections for the Delaney crew out of Bridgeport," Corrado said. "She borrowed it 8 months ago to cover your mother's hospital bills. Ruiz gave her a 6-month term. That term ended 2 months ago. He's been patient, but patience isn't a resource that renews itself." He paused. "She hasn't told you how serious it's gotten because she didn't want you to worry." Verity turned back around. Her face had gone very still, not blank, but controlled, the expression she wore when she was absorbing something that frightened her and refusing to let it show. "Come to the gala," Corrado said. "Stand beside me for the evening. Britt's debt disappears tonight." She looked at him for a long moment. He watched her run the calculation. Was he telling the truth? Could he deliver it? What were the costs of every available alternative? He'd seen her run those calculations 100 times across 18 months. She was never slow. "I won't perform," she said finally. "I won't spend the evening pretending to be smaller than I am, so your guests feel comfortable." "I'd consider that a failure of the evening," he said. Another long pause. Then she exhaled, slow and controlled, and pointed at him. "One evening, and if anything goes sideways, I negotiate my own terms." Corrado allowed himself the edge of a smile. "I'd expect nothing less." The dress took 40 minutes of honest conversation to settle on. Corrado had sent a stylist to Verity's apartment in Pilsen. Not to redirect her, but to work with her, which turned out to be a meaningful distinction. The woman arrived with a full rack and the good sense to listen when Verity said, without apology, that she wasn't wearing anything she couldn't breathe in. The sapphire blue was the answer, a gown that understood engineering as well as fashion, structured to honor her curves, draped to move when she moved, with a neckline that didn't ask her to perform discomfort for anyone's benefit. When Verity stood in front of her bedroom mirror and actually looked, really looked, longer than she usually let herself, she didn't angle her body or try to minimize anything. She looked like someone who had decided to take up space. She looked like herself, just louder. Corrado was waiting on the sidewalk when she came out of her building. He wore a charcoal tuxedo that sat on his broad shoulders like a custom guarantee, and he was looking at his phone when she pushed through the glass door. He looked up. He stopped looking at his phone. "I still don't own appropriate shoes," Verity said, because the silence had stretched past the point she was willing to leave it there. "These are the best I had." The heels were navy, 2 inches, practical by any standard. He looked at them briefly, then he looked at her, unhurried, deliberate, without apology for the attention, and she made herself hold still under it instead of deflecting. "You look," he started and then stopped, cleared his throat. "You look exactly right." She got into the Escalade before her face could do something she'd regret. The Gala occupied the entire ballroom level of the Marquette Grand. The Cardinale Foundation had been running this event for 11 years, and the city's elite had long since understood that appearing was not optional. Politicians, judges, executives from every industry that touched shipping or port logistics, all of them circulating through a room that cost more per square foot per hour than most families spent on groceries in a month. Verity knew this. She'd reviewed the Foundation's tax filings. When the Escalade pulled to the entrance and Corrado came around to offer his hand, she took it. She'd decided in the car, quietly, as a private accounting, that she was not going to hunch her shoulders tonight. Not because he'd asked her not to. He hadn't said a word about it, but she had run the probability analysis on the alternatives and concluded that making herself smaller only ever made other people comfortable at her own expense. She was finished subsidizing that. The cameras lit up like a summer storm when her heel hit the carpet. She heard the murmuring start before they'd reached the top of the steps. She kept her chin level and her grip on his arm light and certain. The ballroom was exactly what she'd expected. Several hundred people who had spent considerable money persuading themselves they'd earned the right to evaluate everyone else. She felt the stares track across her, the curls, the glasses, the gown, the body the gown made no effort to conceal, and she let them look. They could catalogue whatever they wanted. She was here. The woman who intercepted them near the entrance was not someone Verity had anticipated quite so quickly. Alessia Farrow had the kind of beauty that required a team, a perfect blowout, precise contouring, a bronze gown that had probably been delivered under armed guard. She was a close friend of Emilio's fiancé, and she had been, according to the social dossier Verity had assembled on the drive over, suggested to the Cardinale family as a companion for Corrado on more than one occasion. She smiled at him with practiced warmth. "Corrado," she said, kissing the air near his cheek with continental efficiency. Then she turned to Verity, and the smile stayed in place with some effort. "And you are?" "Verity Dunmore," Corrado said. Alessia looked at Verity, not quickly, not casually, but in the deliberate way of someone deciding how much to take seriously. The assessment moved from the curls to the glasses to the curves that the sapphire gown declined to minimize. "How wonderful," Alessia said, in a tone that technically constituted a compliment. "Corrado, I have to say, I didn't realize your tastes had become so adventurous." The cluster of women nearby went still. The couple to the left stopped mid-sentence. The insult had been constructed carefully, dressed as open-mindedness, landing as a category. Verity felt the familiar heat climb up the back of her neck. The old reflex surfaced, "Go quiet, let it pass, calculate the social cost of responding." She did not do any of those things. "Alessia," she said pleasantly, "Farrow, your family holds the primary import contracts on the Lower Lake Corridor." "Right," she tilted her head. "I was reviewing logistics exposure projections for that sector last month. Your declared cargo volume is genuinely impressive." A brief pause. "The gap between your declared volume and the actual dock usage logs is also impressive, in a different way. I keep expecting someone to ask me to explain the discrepancy." Alessia's smile came apart slowly, like a structure that hadn't been told it was falling. Corrado said nothing, but his hand settled at the small of Verity's back, steady, deliberate, staying there. "Enjoy the evening," Verity said, and walked into the ballroom. The orchestra was playing something constructed for sweeping across marble floors, and Corrado led her to the center of it. She knew the basic form. She'd spent time the night before doing research, because she'd suspected this was coming, and she didn't like being underprepared for anything. "You didn't need me to step in," he said, close to her ear. "No," she agreed, "I didn't. You already knew the dock logs. I know every logistics exposure number in a 60-mile radius. It's my job." She followed his lead into a turn, the silk moving around her. "Stop looking impressed. You hired me because I know these things." "I hired you because you're the only analyst I've ever had who would have caught the Stets variance at the 14-month mark," he said. "Someone else would have rounded to margin of error and moved on. You pulled the thread." She looked up at him. He had 4 inches on her, maybe 5. "Is that your version of a compliment?" "It's a fact. I prefer facts." "So do I." She held his gaze. "Then here's one. You didn't need a date for tonight. You've come to this gala alone 3 of the last 4 years. The press never made anything of it." His expression stayed even. "No," he agreed. "I didn't need one." Before she could press on that, a hand landed on Corrado's shoulder. Heavy, proprietary, the touch of a man who had been powerful long enough to confuse tolerance with approval. Senator Gil Barkley was broad and silver-haired, and wearing the expression of someone who had never once been made to feel unwelcome anywhere. He had been Illinois' 5th District Senator for 11 years, during which time he had developed a reputation for severity toward organized crime while maintaining a curious inability to connect that severity to anyone in the Cardinale organization's vicinity. Corrado. He shook hands with the warmth of a man auditioning for something. Then he turned to Verity, and she saw the millisecond recalibration, the mental arithmetic of who brought her here. "And who is this?" The question was aimed at Corrado, not her. "Verity Dunmore," she said, before Corrado could answer. "Actuarial risk analysis for the Cardinale Group." Barkley's eyebrows lifted, amused. "A numbers girl?" "Among other things." He chuckled. The practiced chuckle of a man who used it to underline that something had been charming. "Corrado, I'd say you could have left the bookkeeper at the office, but I suppose it's good to have someone keeping track of things." He took a slow sip of his scotch, entirely comfortable. "We should talk Monday about the Port Authority timeline. The commission meeting's been pushed, and I want to make sure we're—" "Senator Barkley," Verity said. He blinked. He was clearly not accustomed to being interrupted. "I just want to make sure I have the right person," she said, her voice even and almost academic. "Your campaign finance filings show 2 significant disbursements to a media consulting firm called Cascade Meridian over the last fiscal cycle, $340,000 combined." She watched something shift in his face, barely perceptible. "The thing is, I spent last Tuesday running disbursement pattern analysis across 5 Midwestern states. I do it quarterly, standard work, and Cascade Meridian has a distribution signature that FinCEN classifies as consistent with layering." She paused. "The probability that those disbursements represent legitimate consulting fees, given that match, is approximately 4%. Another pause. "I'm an actuary. 4% is not a figure I'd want to stake anything on." Barkley's scotch glass was very still. "I'd also note," she added, conversationally, "that Cascade Meridian is registered to a mailbox address in Naperville, which is unusual for a firm commanding that kind of retainer. But I'm sure there's an explanation." She smiled, genuine, unhurried. "Enjoy the gala, Senator. The lamb is excellent." She turned back to Corrado. He was staring at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Open, unguarded, the look of a man who had been surprised by something he hadn't thought could still surprise him. "I need a drink," she said, "something that doesn't taste like a fundraiser." "We're leaving," Corrado said. "I thought we had to stay through." "We're leaving," he said again, in a tone that made further discussion beside the point. The partition in the Escalade was up. Chicago moved past the tinted windows in amber and white. Lakeshore Drive at 11 p.m., the city operating with complete indifference to whatever had just happened inside the Marquette Grand. Verity had taken her glasses off to clean them with the hem of her gown, because she had nothing else, which she'd told herself she wasn't going to do, but here she was. "You're going to say something," she said. "Barclay will behave himself going forward," Corrado said. "After tonight." I know, that was the point. She put her glasses back on, the city sharpened. Verity. She turned her head. He was watching her the way he sometimes did in the boardroom, not calculating, not predatory, but concentrated. Like she was a problem he was trying to solve correctly and refusing to rush. "You said you didn't need a date tonight," he said. "You were right." "I know." "I needed you." He said it flatly, the way he said every true thing. No decoration, no preamble. Specifically, "I've been looking for a reason to ask you somewhere that wasn't a conference room for the better part of 18 months. Emilio's engagement gave me a viable one, and I used it." Verity was quiet. "Brit's debt," he said. "I bought it from Ruiz 9 months ago." She turned to look at him fully. "She's been safe since September," Corrado said. "I was holding the marker, but I wasn't going to call it. I never intended to call it. I told you about it tonight because I needed you to say yes, and I'm not proud of that, but I'm not going to lie to you about it either. You manipulated me." "Yes." "Using my sister." "Yes." She sat with that. Outside, a horn sounded somewhere on the highway, sharp, brief, then gone. The city kept its own accounting. "The Stett situation," she said slowly. "You said you weren't surprised when I told you, because you already knew." His expression didn't shift. "I let it develop 3 weeks longer than necessary. I needed you angry and walking through my door." Verity processed this the way she processed everything. Not with shock, but with careful internal accounting of what it meant. Every implication laid out in sequence, examined for weight. "You're telling me all of this right now," she said. "Why?" "Because I don't want you to find out later and feel like you were managed." He looked at her directly. "And because what I want from you isn't a transaction. I don't want you to owe me anything. I don't want you staying in a room with me because of a ledger, a beat. I want you there because you want to be." Verity looked at her hands in her lap, practical hands. Hands that ran numbers at 4 in the morning and had walked into the office of the most dangerous man in Chicago and set a folder down in front of him without shaking. She thought about Brit, quietly not sleeping for 8 months, carrying something she hadn't wanted Verity to know. Safe since September, because this man had made it so without telling either of them. She thought about the ballroom, about standing on that carpet with her shoulders back, not because he'd asked her to, but because she'd decided. About the weight of Alessia's look, and the doc log data, and the precise satisfaction of deploying the right number at the right moment. About the way she'd felt standing there, fully herself, unedited, and how no one in that room had made her feel like that was a problem. She thought about the fact that she had liked it, all of it. "You said you want me in the room," she said finally. "Yes." "Which rooms?" Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, something warmer than that, and considerably more unguarded. "Whichever ones matter." She turned to face him properly. "Then I have terms, non-negotiable." She raised one finger. "You want something from me," you asked directly. "I'll tell you yes or no and you respect the answer. You don't engineer situations." Another finger. "If you know something that affects me or my family, you tell me, not later, not when it's convenient." Third finger. "I will tell you things you don't want to hear. Wrong numbers, bad plans, people stealing from you. You will not punish me for it." He looked at each raised finger in turn. Then he looked at her face. "Done," he said. "I mean it. I know you do. That's why I said yes without negotiating." Verity held his gaze for a 3 count. He didn't look away. He never looked away. She'd noticed that about him in the very first week, when she'd been new and had shown him a revised liability projection that contradicted his previous analysis by 30%. He hadn't dismissed her. He'd asked her to walk him through the methodology, step by step, and at the end he'd said, "Fix it," and never looked back at the old numbers. She'd thought about that meeting more than she'd admitted to herself. "Corrado," she said, his first name, no Mr. in front of it, direct and unqualified, and something quick and unguarded crossed his face. She noted it, filed it. "You should have just asked me." "I know," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd say yes." She considered that, the honesty of it. A man who apparently admitted very little, admitting that he hadn't been certain. "I might have," she said. He reached across the seat, slowly, giving her every moment to redirect it, and took her hand. His was large and cool and certain. She let it stay. The city moved past them. The lake was a dark suggestion to the east, and the lights stacked themselves against the sky the way they always did. 1,000 bright points, each one a variable, none of them random, all of them adding up to something. She didn't let go. "For what it's worth," she said after a while, looking out at the water, "the 4% estimate I gave Barclay was conservative." She felt him look at her. How conservative? Closer to 2. Corrado Cardinale, who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time, loved. Not a polished laugh, not a managed one. A real one, low and sudden and entirely unguarded, like something that had been waiting a while to get out. Verity decided privately that it was the best return on risk she'd ever calculated.